It was like we had a secret society, and you had to be a member of the society to know what was going on. There was harassment of people who were different. There was a feeling that lesbians needed to set up a space where they were safe.
Well, the neighborhood has changed a lot. There's been a real loss of women's spaces. I mean, almost all the bars, basically.
I think that lesbians are disappearing.
The early LGBTQ movement emerged in the late 60s and the early 70s, and it was largely a reaction to the fact that women couldn't find a place in the other movements of that time. Women who participated in those movements often felt that their voice wasn't taken seriously. Lesbian feminism developed kind of as an alternative to those other movements.
Lesbian bars seemed to proliferate in Chicago in the 1970s and 80s. And that was when, lesbian liberation started as a movement, and that was really when lesbian bars changed from more of a hidden place to a more open thing. Lesbian bars ended up around Addison. It was a neighborhood that was sort of gentrifying but had not yet gentrified, so it was still pretty cheap to live in.
Lesbians needed to set up a space where they were safe, where they could be open, because it was very dangerous to be a lesbian.
I think even just going to a lesbian bar was a political act at this time period. It was all part of forming community and, in a way, pressuring people that weren't part of the community to accept lesbians as people. It's a space where women can go and be with each other and be openly lesbian. They can have events that are for lesbians that will draw in and help them meet other lesbians. Yes, it may be a commercial space, but it's not just that, it's a community space for people to meet and find community with each other.
I would live in the city and drive back to the suburbs where I taught. I kind of did a reverse commute for a number of years. They were two different lives. You lived a life in the suburbs, a professional life, and then you had a gay life here. My first time going to a gay bar, I made them take me up to Milwaukee because I was afraid somebody would see me in the city of Chicago. Because you didn't want anybody to know. Your job was threatened. Everything that you had was threatened back then. It was a very, very different time. It's like, it's unbelievable we made it through those times. Yeah.
There would be raids where police would come in, newspapers would publish all the names of the people that were arrested. If you were married and you were at a lesbian bar and you were arrested, you would be outed. And you could lose everything. You could lose your kids, you could lose your job. And so it was a way of kind of keeping queer people in their place. So you just had to deal with it. But dealing with that meant you didn't have anyone to protect you. So I think it was a very scary time to be a lesbian.
This is sort of a uniform from back in the day. Jeans, a shirt, the bolo tie, and a corduroy blazer. When we first started coming in here, which would have been in the early 70s, there still were city ordinances on the books prohibiting cross-dressing. And so they would raid gay bars. It was an interesting thing.
So Chicago had a dress code ordinance. It was called the zipper ordinance because women were allowed to have zippers on the back of their pants because that was considered to be women's pants. But if they had them on the front of their pants, they were considered to be cross-dressing and dressed like men. And that was an excuse for a lot of raids in Chicago. They would just be ruined just for going to a bar.
It's what kind of kept you alive, because when you're assumed to be straight, you're assumed
to be part of a community that has no idea that gays even exist. Now you have some place to breathe. The only place that you felt like you could be yourself was in a bar. So, yeah.
Today there are not the same number of lesbian spaces, certainly as there were back in the 70s and 80s.
I think once CK and Augie's closed, there weren't very many left. There may have been a few other bars. They would be there and gone in no time. They're gone. Hang on to the history, I guess. Yeah.
Well, the neighborhood has changed a lot. There's been a real loss of women's spaces. I mean, almost all the bars, basically. This last Pride Fest, on the day that the parade was happening, I woke up and I felt really sad. I was like mourning the loss of the women's spaces around here. I actually sat down that morning and wrote down the names and addresses of all the bars I used to go to. The Ladybug was one of my favorites, and that was right down the street. I mean, people are saying, oh, well, you know, we don't really need women's spaces or lesbian spaces because, you know, everyone's assimilating, and I really don't buy it. There's more discrimination than ever. And the idea that we don't need our own space, I think, is erroneous.
Well, we're headed to the location where the Ladybug used to be back in the 80s, and it was one of my favorite hangouts. I haven't been back, so I'm kind of looking forward to it.
Well, the place is kind of reversed now. Where the kitchen is on the right used to be seating and the dance floor, and on the left used to be the bar, and now I guess the restrooms are here. You know, I'm older now and I probably wouldn't spend as much time in bars anymore, but I miss a place where you can go to meet women and just feel comfortable and safe, and a place where you just feel that you belong.
Women started finding other ways of getting together besides bars.
The need to go to a bar to meet somebody was not there. I mean, now you have social media, and now we lost that secret club.
I think that lesbians are disappearing, not just the bars, and it's happening here, it's happening nationwide, and I don't know where they're going.
Folks aren't identifying as lesbian as much anymore. It is increasingly difficult to identify as a lesbian. There's also a shift towards queer as opposed to a lesbian bar. I would argue that we don't necessarily need lesbian bars. We need queer bars and queer spaces. Having just lesbian and gay spaces, it's on the binary. It leaves so many people out of the fold, and that's just kind of more the norm of our community, and we're focused on intersectionality. If I'm going out, I am going out to all of the nomadic pop-up parties that are geared towards the queer community. They do a party series, and there's a theme. It's just very high production. Technology has really kind of ignited this conversation between intergenerational members of the queer community of, do we even need lesbian bars? And everyone over a certain age will tell you, yes, we absolutely need a physical neighborhood where we can all see and be around each other. While younger people don't necessarily feel the same way. We have the ability to feel so connected to people that we may never see. I do a pre-Stonewall downtown walking tour of kind of what was happening in the queer nightlife scene. Access to our history is so difficult to come by. There's no comprehensive and easily very readable history of queer Chicago. It is important for queer history to be accessible because the more we alienate ourselves from our predecessors, the less progress we are able to make. I think any kind of queer historic research is activism.
A lot of my history, no one will ever see or experience again. Maybe history needs to repeat itself.
Women were always activists. Women need to know what has happened in the past in order to inform what their activities are currently and in the future.
So activists and folks who helped build Boys Town, they did it. Like the wet dream that was what would a gay neighborhood look like has come true. It's happened. What I used to struggle with is when you've spent your whole life advocating for change and chasing change, how do you stop? That's where intersectionality comes in. We're at this new kind of golden age of intersectionality and our activism, and the work doesn't stop when we ourselves are comfortable. It stops when everyone that we're around is comfortable.
I think the last frontier, and I don't know what we'll do after this, are the transgendered people. I mean, once they have been established and accepted and become like everybody else, what's left? I mean, I really don't know. It's like we've conquered the world.